Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third Wikidata birthday speaker series. Thank you all for attending, and if you're watching the recording, great to have you watch the recording. I'm so happy everyone is here. My name is Will Kent. I'll be facilitating this session, and I'll introduce our panelists in just a second. But a quick overview of the next hour is we'll be having a conversation about Wikidata and some really cool projects and sustaining them over time. If you have questions at any point during this hour, feel free to drop them into the Q&A section, which is in the bottom, accessible in the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window. So feel free to add questions there. You can also answer questions in the chat. I know the chat's pretty vibrant right now, which is great. And we'll have time to answer everything at the end of the hour. So let's introduce our panelists. So I'm really happy that Chen can join us. She's a postdoctoral associate, or sorry, that's the old stuff. A trained art historian and archaeologist. Her current project is the International Digital Dura-Europos Archive, and she participated in our July 2020 Wikidata Institute. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Bettina Smith, who is the manager of image collections and fieldwork archives at Dumbarton Oaks Research Library and Collection. She also took our course a couple of years ago. And then we also have Ian Gill, who's the collection information systems specialist at San Francisco MoMA. His recent work has him overhauling the museum collection management system and adding lots of data to Wikidata. So thank you to all of you for joining us. I am excited to hear about what you've been working on, so we'll give a little brief overview of your projects and then jump into some questions. So Anne, would you mind giving us a little overview of what you've been working on lately?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you here this morning. The project that I'm managing is called the International Digital Dura-Europos Archive, and this is based on an archaeological site that is kind of one of the foundational pillars of classical world archaeology. It's a site that is on the cusp between the Roman and the Persian empires. It was excavated 100 years ago by Yale University and the French Institute. But of course, 100 years ago, the country that this site is now in, Syria, was under the French mandate. So there's an issue of kind of colonialist occupation at the time that the site was excavated. And so we are interested in drawing together the artifacts that are kept in different collections across the world, but also increasing the accessibility of these artifacts and recontextualizing them in terms of where they were found specifically within the site, and using Wikidata to kind of make visible the actual find spots of these artifacts. And in recollecting the artifacts together, we are able to essentially virtually rebuild archaeological contexts. So regroup together artifacts that were excavated at the same archaeological site. Of course, these excavations have been published, but they're published only in English. And they are excavation reports that are sometimes hard to get one's hands on. So the work that we're doing is really taking content that is tied up in text right now and turning it into data that can be accessed by people all over the world, regardless of their libraries, holdings, and whatnot. The other thing that we're really excited about is that Wikidata gives us this opportunity to, by parsing out the metadata of the objects that we're working on, we're essentially making them low-level searchable in all the languages that are available within the Wikidata context. For us, this is particularly important because Arabic speakers in particular have not had access to the records for the artifacts in their own native language. And so for the first time, the artifacts, just by merit of coming into the Wikidata environment, are accessible in a whole new way.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview, Anne. We'll dive into this in a little bit more detail in a bit, but Bettina, would you mind sharing a little bit about what you've been working on?
Sure. So our project has been to sort of along the same lines as what the Met and the Cleveland Museum and many other art institutions have done, was to enter the object metadata for all of the Dumbarton Oaks Museum objects into Wikidata. And we came through this sort of via the back door of, because I don't work in the museum, I work in the library. And we had initially started updating or creating Wikidata items for sites in Syria, along the same lines as Anne, because we have a photo collection that depicts late Roman and early Byzantine architectural sites in Syria that we had been working through cataloging and also had uploaded the images to Wikimedia Commons. And so Wikidata seemed like a logical next step. And there we were looking at also possibly doing some of the collections that we have in the image collections and fieldwork archives, which depict museum objects. So we have a lot of collections of photographs of museum objects from various places. And as we were starting to look at that, it occurred to us, well, maybe we should perhaps look at Dumbarton Oaks as museum objects first. So that has been our project of to create it. Luckily, it's a relatively small collection. The fully cataloged items number around like 2,200. So it was something that we could, envision being able to complete in a reasonable amount of time. So that's it.
Perfect. Thanks for that overview. That's so exciting. And Ian, would you give us a little background on what you've been working on lately?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so similar to what Bettina just mentioned, I'd say much of our efforts for involving museum data on Wikidata is just kind of populating, records just based on, the permanent collection, museum's exhibition history. So these are just trying to get more of our data onto an additional platform. So, it's kind of started out with trying to, represent our exhibition history. And then we already had a little bit, like before I started, we already had a little bit of object data on there. But, I've been continuously doing that just because we acquire a lot of artworks every year. But then I think, so beyond that, my project has kind of, it's been absorbed into a larger initiative at the museum, or as a small part of it, let's keep it at that. But the museum is currently, we're working on a thing that we call the Artist Identity Project, which is, to sum it up, it's kind of a way of trying to represent artist information more ethically, more, just, try and do it a little bit better than we had been before. So whether that means generating metrics on the artists in the collection and like what who we're exhibiting and acquiring every year. That's kind of what the project is. So for living artists, that involves sending out a questionnaire and sort of asking people to self identify themselves. But for deceased artists, it involves a pretty rigorous research, just trying to make sure that what we have is as accurate as we can get it to be. And that's kind of where I come in. So we've kind of absorbed Wikidata as part of as a source in our research. So I use it to kind of fill in gaps where we don't have information in our own CMS. And, so that's kind of what it is. And ultimately, and this is still very early, but I think a lot of museums are trying to do similar work to this, and Wikidata has come up as kind of a central repository for this data, just because it's like, if we have it, why not share it? If we can, that there's still a whole lot a lot of complexity there, but I think that is kind of something that's coming down the road.
I love that project too. These are all great projects, and I'm excited to hear more about them. And Ian was kind of touching on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear from the three of you about what Wikidata allows you to do that past platforms or workflows didn't allow you to do. So like what has Wikidata changed for your respective projects? Whoever's excited to go first, take it away.
I mean, I can jump in with maybe some thoughts. So, I mean, I already touched a little bit about the multilingual capacity in Wikidata. So one of the wings of our project, I mean, we realized that there is this problem of Arabic searchability and accessibility for the content that pertains to this particular site. So there's the low-level searchability function that I mentioned, just by parsing our metadata statements into Wikidata links. But then, the other thing that I'm really excited about is the fact that because the interface is already set up for translation essentially into many different languages, we're working together with some native Arabic speaking colleagues and training them to actually interact in the Wikidata platform. And it's user friendly. It doesn't require coding. And so it's been easy for us to essentially teach other folks how to interact in this platform and contribute to it. And now we're working on the one-to-one translation of, say, all of our labels and descriptions for our content. I think this is extremely important because, so often I think that there are methodological innovations that develop maybe in one part of the world without the input of people in another part of the world. And this feels like an opportunity because of the democratic nature of Wikidata. This feels like an opportunity to get input and pull additional people into the conversation about linked open data at a relatively early stage, rather than sort of folks in the West formulating how this thing is going to go for the future and then thrusting it upon people elsewhere. So, I mean, I have other thoughts as well, but I don't want to monopolize. So
I can go briefly also. I mean, I think for us, the great thing about it is just being able to have our collection items in a place where they can interact with other collection, like where people can, the sort of aggregated search that has been tantalizingly promised by linked open data for so many years. We've been hearing about linked open data, it's the future. And I feel like Wikidata is kind of the first real manifestation that we're seeing of that. I mean, it just has to do with adoption, like people need to use it. And so by using it, we're able to play in that sphere and have our objects be able to be compared and contrasted with objects from similar collections across the globe.
Yeah, and I guess similar to that, I think, what we've found is that it's just a great way to, well, in addition to it being, I'd say, definitely the most user-friendly version of linked open data that we've come across. And we took the course and I found it pretty easy to pick up. And so I think just insofar as there's a really easy entrance point, I really like just the sort of, it helps a lot with research, but also collaboration, because, once we contribute things, my favorite example is when I was working on putting our exhibition history, just, creating records for them. I noticed that there was just users that were like enhancing our records, saying like, oh, this exhibition actually also went to this other exhibition or this other venue in the Netherlands or something. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I, added that to our records. So it's like, there's a lot, we can draw on other people's work. And, I think that, and in addition to making our work easier for sure, it's just cool to see how they interact with other people that are interested in our same goals.
Yeah, the community enthusiasm is a nice feature, or just like the community expertise, because I don't know a lot of stuff. We all have limits to our knowledge, and it's nice to have other people kind of step in and carry that forward in a way. And then also to have like cool folks like you contribute as well, because we all bring our expertise to the table. I just want to pause for a second. Stephanie joined us. Hi, Stephanie, welcome.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm in a different time zone and I'm not used to this at all. So I had it on I was like, what? It's at 11. And she's like, no, it's 11 Eastern, not Central. So I deeply apologize for that.
No, don't worry about it. Welcome. Let me just give a quick introduction for you. So, Stephanie Caruso is a Georgi Family Foundation Curatorial Fellow at the Art Institute in Chicago. Previously, she was a postdoctoral fellow in Byzantine art and archaeology at Dumbarton Oaks Research Library and Collection, and she's been working with Bettina frequently. So, welcome. We're just asking some questions, getting some cool answers. So, my next question for all of you is, we're united by Wikidata in these projects, but all of our institutions that we work with and the collections we work with have different dynamics and different challenges. And I'm curious if you had to do anything special to get buy-in or convince anybody that Wikidata is the way to go. What did you have to do?
I can maybe jump in on that one. I think that for me, my background is as a humanist, right? I'm an art historian and archaeologist, and so I guess I went into the linked open data sphere, or the Wikidata sphere, as somebody who felt a little uncomfortable in my technical knowledge, right? And it became very clear to me early on that I wasn't a technical expert by any means, but my understanding and knowledge of what was possible in linked data and in Wikidata was ahead of that of almost all of my colleagues. And so I really had to start at the beginning and to develop a little bit of content in Wikidata so that I could use it to illustrate the ideas and the promise. And I think that was a little uncomfortable for me at first, but I think that ultimately was the thing that allowed me to get some traction, was to not just talk about abstract ideas, but to have something to point to and say, look, let me take this small little subset, this small little case study, and demonstrate to you, what the promise is, so that then I can talk about all the things that I haven't done yet, but all of the ideas that I do have about how this could be better if we were all contributing to it, and if we had buy-in, from the powers that be within the institution to kind of go full scale.
I think that so Dumbarton Oaks has an open access initiative. So I think that Wikidata was a pretty easy sell for the director's office. But we also, Stephanie and I were working in the library, and although Stephanie has, a background in art history and has worked in museum settings before and currently, and so she was a really good bridge and contact with our museum colleagues, but they also were really open to the idea and very supportive in terms of, getting the data for us out of their museum system so that we would have something to input. Yeah, I think also offering to do all of the work it was a big selling point for them.
I think one of the things also is that, like, there might be with non-specialists with this material, like the confusion between what Wikipedia is and what Wikidata is, and trying to like explain how, the authorities in Wikidata are really important. And like, so that was, because I think there was a kind of like hesitation. Well, if people can change information about our material, like what good is that if it's going to be wrong for people, like what's the point of doing this? And we're like, well, no, that's the point of like, that's why you did such a good job, like creating like a stable URL for each object in the collection, that we can now like point to that with a property, and people can make stuff up, but if they click on it, they'll go to your website and know for a fact that that's not right, you know?
These are some great points. On a related note, I know that for, I think everyone in this call, you've been working on your projects for a good amount of time now. Like Ian, I know you've been working for the majority of the pandemic, and you've been going at this project for a couple years. What have you done? Like, what do you attribute the success of sustaining these projects to? Whether it's funding, or whether it's a specific metric or a talking point or demonstration? Like, what's worked to keep things going?
Well, I think related to the previous question in terms of like institutional buy-in, well, I think I'm very lucky that I haven't, or that I have, like, buy-in has never really been an issue. I mean, like, my initial, I initially took the class because it was suggested by my supervisors. So they're like, hey, Ian, you want to go do this? I was like, yeah, sure. So they've been very supportive in that. And then also that, a lot of my work has to do with collections advocacy. So like representing the collection on different platforms. And so it's always been like, it's like, this is good, like do this. And so Wikidata fits perfectly into that, it's not, it was never much of a stretch. And then also, with the newer project about artist identities, there has been a lot, like before, where it was more an informal thing that we thought was important. I think in the last year, for sure, it has been like an institutional priority. So like, you can go to our website and see like the more formalized, like, this is what we do, this is who we are, parts of the project. So that's been helpful. But in terms of just sustaining it, yeah, I mean, it's been working a long time, and it's sometimes it, depending on what what we do, it kind of, I get to spend more or less time on the project. We in 2020 we migrated to a new CMS also, so that takes up a lot of my time. But yeah, I think it's just the ability to weave in the project to the other things that we're already doing that also the museum finds important, or is expressing support for. So I think that's, and just always hearing that there's like, oh, Ian, this Wikidata work is cool. I'm like, okay, great, let's keep going.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on something that Ian just said, weaving the work in. For me, I'm an educator. I'm teaching at Bard College, and one of the things that has both been exciting, but I think has also sustained the project, is the ways in which it's relatively easy to get students involved with this work, and to use it as an opportunity to think about the future of digital archives and how we can, more ethically manage digital archives. And I see it as an opportunity to essentially, help students get their feet wet with thinking about what a future of linked open data could be. And so, I am trying to weave the work into my pedagogy, essentially. But then I think, the other thing is really, it comes down to books, right? So Will, you sort of alluded to this in your question. And I was very lucky in that, in approaching my supervisors and kind of selling them on this idea, I was able to get a little bit of seed funding to help with somebody that could help me with the batch uploading process and all of that, because we were dealing with a volume of content, and I didn't necessarily have the Python background and whatnot that might have been that was definitely helpful in kind of normalizing the data in ways that then it could be batch uploaded into Wikidata. And then I will say that we're very fortunate to have received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to support this work, but that also was kind of predicated on getting a little bit of an initial seed fund so that we could kind of create a case study that then demonstrated the promise of the work, but also allowed us to kind of work out some of the kinks before we applied for higher level funding.
Ours hasn't been going on for that long, as long, so.
Well, I
Only
hope it
about a year.
continues.
Yes, it will,
So
until it's done.
it sounds like a lot of different pieces fell together, whether it's through support from supervisors, just support for time, passion, expertise, or getting some funding always helps. And I do hope there are more opportunities for funding moving forward. It really feels like, in spite of Wikidata turning 10, there aren't that many funding opportunities yet, specifically for linked data across this like wide spectrum of interest, because it does apply to a lot of different subfields, and different projects can come of it, as we all know. So I'm hoping that we can convince more people to do it, and projects like yours are a great inspiration because of the notice it gets from these funders. I think that's encouraging. So thanks for sharing that. In our conversation last week, I think it was Chris Long from Colorado was talking about Wikidata being the Wild West of metadata. And there's a lot that you can't anticipate, and you just kind of have to roll with the punches sometimes. So I'm wondering, in your projects, where do you go to learn more? How do you know what you know and do what you do?
Well, I mean, the Wikidata course, obviously, and then also badgering Will with questions after the course is over, is probably the best possible resource. But there's also things like LD4, the Wikidata, what is it called? Like interest group that meets every other week. And then I'm a member of ARLIS, the Art Library Society of North America, and they also have a little Wikidata interest group that meets once a month. So those are useful ways to find out about tools and things that I would not otherwise have known about.
Yeah, I'll also put in a plug for just the discussion pages and the Telegram channel for Wikidata. As a new Wikidata user, I was a little bit intimidated about revealing my ignorance on certain issues. How to do certain things in Wikidata, but at Will's encouragement, actually, part of the course was really helping us to recognize that everybody's learning something, and that the community is there to support us and help us to grow. I started putting things out there, and I can't tell you how many times I have benefited from some good Samaritan that has gone in and rescued me when I made a mistake, or helped me to puzzle through something as I was figuring out a data modeling question, or all of that. So I think those discussion pages are really important.
Yeah, I think looking at the way that other people do things, or like how are other institutions representing their artworks on platform, and then I'm like, oh, I can do that too, or like, oh, that's how you represented that, because there's a lot of different ways you can do, like like dates or whatever. I think it's just looking at what other people have done, especially in terms of like queries and stuff. Like I'm not, I wouldn't say that my Sparkle is great, but I am good at copy pasting. So, and then also, yeah, the users that will come in and let you know if you've done something incorrectly. That's it's always kind of funny to get it's like, hey, Ian, you didn't, or it's like, you shouldn't do it this way. I'm like, all right, that's right. Yes, that was an accident. But yeah, I think that's, and then finding tools. I like just going through the list of just available things that people have developed, was it like quick statements? I use that a lot. It's a fun one. Or just and then in terms of like making the actual project page, like the list ones, those are cool. It's templates,
All great comments. Thanks for sharing that. There's a ton of different resources, and it is kind of wild that there's this big like cloud of helpful people there. And everyone is like super nice. Like occasionally someone will be a little short with you, but that's okay. People are human. It's a big benefit. And I think it's cool in talks like these and all the other Wikidata birthday talks that are going on this month. that you can actually meet these people. So it's not just like a mysterious username of somebody out there. It's like, oh, you do what I do in a different country. That's so cool. Or you've been doing this for 15 years. This is amazing. I like that. That cloud of support is really nice. So kind of related to what we've been talking about, we've been working on our projects for a while, and there's some really great work going on. I'm wondering, as you've been working on these things, has it inspired other thoughts or other projects that you could do, or like some pie in the sky thing where you're like, oh, I wish I had time to do this, but I'm working on this right now. So just curious.
Well, actually, I mean, I have one that I thought of. So during this project, I've like transitioned to a different position at a new institution. And I'm part of a working group that they talk about like narrative content and things like for expressing, information about their collection to visitors. And there was a speaker, one of the curators from Asian art, about how they put, Chinese artworks with Chinese on the labels, and Korean and Japanese and Japanese. And they're talking about like, well, like the logistics of like, how can we put all this information on one label and not make it overwhelming to the visitor? And are we like privileging the, people whose this cultural heritage, this material belongs to, by just putting Chinese on it? Like, what about another, like Spanish? And it came to my mind. I was like, well, what if we had a Q code on every object, and then, you don't have to do all the work of translating everything, but it like, makes the stuff more accessible. Because I think that's one of the great things about Wikidata, is that if your browser is in a different language, that it kind of translates those concepts, at least, if not the actual, like if someone hasn't translated the other material, that it will translate the concepts about that object to it. So, and, I guess there's the issue of like technology, like does every visitor to the museum have a smartphone that they can type it? But I mean, it's one step in the right direction, I think, because it does like break down that like language barrier in a really cool way.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on the language thing, I have this idea that what I would love to do, and I invite people to be in touch if you're also interested in something like this, is, this touches on something I talked about at the beginning, right? That oftentimes there is a conversation going on about a methodological development that is happening in one part of the world, but isn't necessarily always shared, especially with more marginalized regions. And I'm doing work, obviously, that deals with cultural heritage material from Syria. And I would love to look at maybe partnering with other institutions and offering Wikidata trainings and getting the word out about how easy it is to interact in this platform. And the payoff of something like this could be huge, right? Both for a project like mine, where we could get more diverse perspectives looking at the content that we're actually creating, and creating conversations about, say, the people who are in the archival photographs that we're documenting, and the kinds of photographs that we're bringing into Wikidata, for instance, again, taken over 100 years ago and cataloged with an archaeologist's eye, not with an eye to, say, maybe some of the things about the particular landscape or the work environment or the geopolitical context at the time. There's a lot of different ways that this content could be utilized. And I think if we were able to create conversations with colleagues elsewhere and get them kind of working in this environment with us, I have worried a little bit about some of the places where Wikidata seems to get taken up, and worried that maybe we're only talking to ourselves, right? In say the Anglo-American and Western European context. I know that there are initiatives in Africa and in South America, and those are really important and give me a lot of hope. But as far as I know, in the Middle East, this isn't something that has been taken up. And so I would really love to find ways to create inroads with colleagues elsewhere so that we could have these kinds of productive kind of co-editing or collaborative editorial conversations.
I love that so much. I just want to listen to that on repeat because it's such a great vision for the future Wikidata. Any other additional project ideas that have come to mind?
Well, for us, so I'd say that a lot of, in terms of like populating our information on Wikidata, a lot of, or always got to have a reference, right? So all of it comes from our online collection, or just like the website. And in some of the areas like exhibition history, I know which ones are not up there, but because they're not, we don't have it built up in our online collection. I don't necessarily create them yet. So it's funny because a lot of this project is actually, it's pushing more, I would say, like internal. It's like, oh, we should make this information public, which is always something that we wanted to do. But for me personally, it's just like, well, yeah, so I can put it on Wikidata, right? But so like for me, because for the, I mean, museum has been around since 1935, right? So there's a lot of history there, and I think there's a lot more information I think would be really cool to put on the platform. So like, or my big one is exhibition checklists. I'd love to be able to link all of these exhibitions to the artworks. But that information isn't necessarily publicized. So I was like, what are ways that we can do this for our own website, and then we can kind of continue it. So that's one thing that we're looking at.
Very exciting. I love this. This I guess this is more a comment than a question. I'm like an audience member now. There's been a lot that's come up about ethics and data, and Ian and your things that you've said are really encouraging to me. I love hearing about it. And I think it's part of what Wikidata is. There's like an inherent radical bent to it because everyone can contribute to it. And the notion of like de-siloing is like a really big deal, just to combine all this data together and have it mix around and allow anyone to participate, with like the little asterisks of like, you need internet, you need to understand how it works, and that those are big deals. But as compared to previous systems and ways of managing data, it's a huge step forward. So I'm encouraged by that. I think that's really cool. And makes me excited for future projects with linked data and institutions. And we don't, we're just getting started. We don't know what's going to happen with a lot of this. We just know that if we throw a lot of our data out there, we get some really cool case studies so far. But like the aggregate, 10 years from now, which I have a question for in a little bit, is going to be very interesting to see. I don't know if that prompts any responses from anybody, but I just had to get that off my chest. All right. Well, another question I have is, what do you personally find most compelling about this kind of work? You're all drawn to it at many levels, probably. And just, I'm curious for you, what draws you to it? What gets you excited?
I think for me, like in terms of research and stuff, it provides like a different set of questions that you can ask of the material, like as a humanist, because you're working with you would be able to work with such a much broader set of data in like one consolidated place, that like the kind of questions that you would ask of the material wouldn't be possible if you had to go to each archive, or like that it's just not possible. And also I think, like, speaking of like referencing Anne's issue with like the language, like the country of origin and stuff, like a lot of the scholarship, I started this project also, Bettina and I started from like a perspective on working on Syria as a place, and that when I started to get exposed to these places, it was like, okay, in German it's spelled this way, in English it's spelled this way, in French it's spelled this way, and then there's the Arabic, because they're all from Arabic, so it's transliterations, and like, how are we going to convey this in a certain way? And I think, like, as a researcher, you miss so much because you just don't have the capacity to like know every single transliteration. How are you going to search this? Like, did Harvard's, catalog, catalog it this way versus another? And then, so you're just missing a lot of data just as a researcher. And so having like a QID that is like translatable between all these issues just makes it more possible to get a fuller depth of research available to you without having to like think about all these permutations depending on where you're looking. And so like it just as a model, I found it compelling and as something that I think should move further within research institutions.
Well, building off of that, I mean, I think that I feel similarly as Stephanie, but I think that I get most excited when I think about like, for how many generations have researchers been reinventing the same research, right? Where, I had to go and figure out all those different permutations of the different spellings of Dura-Europos, right? And if somebody can just point to the QR code and nobody ever has to do that ever again, like what can we put our brain power to going forward, right? The idea that it's easier for us to build on each other's research if we don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. I find really exciting.
Yeah, I would that's, yeah, sums it up perfectly. I think it's just, sharing sharing your data with a wider audience allows for greater collaboration. So you don't know who will come across it or how they'll come across it, but they can contribute their expertise and then we all benefit.
And I'll just add in terms of, why Wikidata is appealing to me. I think just innately as a librarian and archivist and reformed cataloger, Wikidata just makes sense, like it feels very natural. It's like, of course we'll do this. So like, it's just cataloging, so if there are any catalogers out there who aren't sure if they want to adopt Wikidata, you can do it. I promise.
It's also very satisfying to just upload a bunch of stuff and then see it in there.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh,
that's a rush for us.
Well, or to teach a student how to do it, right? Like I had a student that was in my office earlier this week that she added her first item and was so excited, that I think that sometimes, I don't know. I forget sometimes that rush of just doing it for the first time and like having attained this new skill. And it's something very tangible that I think can be really compelling and addictive almost.
It's true. I love it. The instant gratification is very satisfying where it's like, I made a change. I can see the change. Everyone else can see the change. It's pretty great. And it does like challenge that paradigm of we have to centralize everything. It has to go through so many layers of authority. It's got to be okayed and double checked. And I know there are errors and there are problems with Wikidata. I'll be the first one to admit the data quality could be better, but that's like every system. And I think in our first week's conversation, we talked about that, like no system is immune to the challenges that Wikidata goes through. It's just that it's so open and transparent and immediately changeable that you can fix it. So that's, I don't know. It's a good thing to invest in, but oh yeah, Jamie just shared it in the chat for those of you who have that open. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock and I want to give a quick shout out to the question and answer section. If you have more questions, please add them there. I've got one more question for all of you and I'd love to hear your take on all of this, which is it's Wikidata's 10th birthday coming up October 29th. I know we're all really excited to celebrate this goofy little knowledge base that we love so much. I'm wondering in 5 or 10 years, the role that you see Wikidata playing, you've worked with it very closely. You've got some good nuggets of Wikidata wisdom that you've already imparted to all of us. So how do you see it changing the landscape or the role that it will play or how you interact with it in terms of your roles? Take a minute to think it over. We don't have to jump into it.
I can fill the space a little bit. I'll just say that I mean, I didn't know, I'll freely admit this here, I didn't know that Wikidata existed before maybe 2 years ago. So, and now I'm presenting on it. And I think that like rapid increase, I think I'm seeing that in, a lot of my library colleagues and other institutions. And I think it's just going to grow from here on out. I mean, like people adopting Wikidata, like importing Wikidata metadata into their library catalogs and, in addition to contributing things to the platform. So I think it's just gonna exponential. That's the word I was looking for. It's gonna increase exponentially from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I'm most excited about is that I'm already seeing it as kind of a crosswalk between a lot of independent projects. So linked data projects, but projects that one would have to kind of export the data out and all of that. And I'm starting to see the spaghetti strings of Wikidata tying together these islands within the linked open data ecosystem, which I think is really exciting. I had another thought, but now I'm now I'm forgetting. I'll speak up again when it comes back to me.
For me, I think like if it keeps progressing, that we have these data sets, that again, it kind of like speaks to what I said before. I think that humanists will be able to ask different questions of the material that they study. Like, I'm interested in, like, say, weave structure of textiles. And if all museums put in their textiles and their information about it, then I could do a search, and like ask questions that if I had to go to each museum would probably not be possible. But like, or like provenance data, like if I'm able to like look at, if we're able to find a way to put that information into object records in Wikidata, that I can do a search like of X dealer in this, you know what I mean? And find all these permutations of connections that if I had to search every catalog would probably not happen. Like it would just be too much work, like too slow going, kind of like the equivalent of like, I guess when like text mining and stuff that was able to happen when they did the OCR, like I think people who study text were able to ask different questions of the material than if they had to read every single book to find it out. And I think it's going to be the same with objects as an art historian, if we have entries for every object in one solidified database.
Yeah, I know what I was going to say. It was about data round tripping. So the idea of reabsorbing content that is generated by the amazing editors within the Wikidata community. So specifically with us, we're testing out this thing with Arabic translation of our labels and whatnot. And ideally, the idea that could be reabsorbed into a collection database and used for collection ends in the future is really exciting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in 5 years, I think, yeah, echoing what others have said, I think there's going to be a wider adoption for sure. I mean, I alluded to earlier that, in terms of this like artist identity project, a lot of other museums are working on this, and they want, and it's come up in other meetings where it's like, oh, what if there was like a central data repository where we could share all of our own information, and then we wouldn't have to redo each other's research. And then it's like, well, that exists, I mean, it's like, you can do that. And I think, so I think Wikidata is in a great position to serve as that. And I think it's, at this point, it's more just yeah, just people more wider adoption, just learning how to do it. But of course, it's pretty easy to learn, I think. So it just takes time,
I love these responses, but I love Wikidata. This is great. Thank you for sharing your perspectives on the future, which looks awesome from my perspective. I'd also add, I think that Wikidata is probably going to go through like similar growth to Wikipedia, where when that first came out, if you can remember, everyone was super skeptical and questioned its authority and its quality, and everyone was just like, don't use it, it's a terrible source. And now everyone uses it, period. And it's gotten a lot better. There are a lot of tools and community oversight into the development of articles and information quality. And that's already happening with Wikidata, but I just think it's going to be more widely understood and accepted, the implications of which are going to be pretty vast, I think, where it's just like, yeah, this is where we go for data. And we'll just like, ladle some out and like put it into our collection and it'll be fantastic every time. But we'll see what happens. I'm excited for it. Anyway, let me transition to the question and answer section of the Zoom. Feel free to keep adding to anyone listening. But Anne, I've got a two-parter for you. So this first part is from Joe, who is wondering how many people work on your projects and how are they parsing these documents? And the second part is from Callie, who's wondering if you could elaborate on engaging students or student workers on this as a Wikidata project.
Yeah, sure. So to Joe's question first, we're still getting our expanded team up and running. So right now we have 3 archival researchers, so folks who are at the PhD level who are doing content research and helping us to refine the metadata and think about responsible data modeling decisions within Wikidata. Then we also have a colleague who is overseeing the Arabic translation wing of the project. And he himself is a Syrian archaeologist. And we are working now to recruit some undergraduate Arabic learners and use this as an opportunity both in practicing translation and immersing our students more deeply in the particularities of translation decisions. There's been a lot with disambiguating between different shades of sense of terms. And so we're hoping to hire 2 students to help with that work, and maybe an additional PhD level expert to help with that work as well. And then we have someone who is kind of helping with the logistical stuff. As the team grows, so too does the administrative end of these sorts of endeavors. And then there are 2 co-PIs on the project. Myself, who is the content specialist and has some knowledge of the technical end, and then my co-PI, who is a specialist in cultural heritage photography and 3D modeling. And then we have 2 Wikimedians in residence that are helping to develop the infrastructure around the importation of batch uploads and helping us to kind of make responsible data modeling decisions and whatnot. Then the question about pedagogy. So for the time being, what I have been doing is teaching a course that is about digital archives and ethics of digital archives, and talking about some of the gaps in traditional archival physical archives. So the idea that, as I alluded to before, these photographs that we're dealing with were cataloged in such a way that they made mention of the features and specific buildings that are depicted in the photographs, but the people are often used just as scales, or the Western folks who are depicted in these pictures are labeled, but the Arabic workers themselves are treated as invisible. And so drawing students' attention to that, but then helping them, I've asked them each to adopt an object and to be responsible for thinking through the data modeling decisions that they would make if they were importing this thing into Wikidata, and looking at some comparanda, some objects that I've modeled myself, and then using those the objects that I modeled as templates for the actual importation of an archival document into Wikidata. And really, you know, that kind of getting one's feet wet and actually doing it yourself has inspired a lot of really important conversations about how to model things, equity in access to content, and the multilinguality feature. The students are really seeing that in action as they're grappling with how to actually function in the Wikidata environment.
Awesome. Thank you for that response, Anne. I hope that answers your questions, Joe and Callie. Mary Rose asked a quick question that I'll ask to be answered in the chat, just because I think a link would suffice. And it's about, does anyone know about legal dockets being uploaded because it's public data trapped behind Westlaw and LexisNexis? Anything about a project like that? I don't know off the top of my head. But there is one final question that I want to pose to all of you, also from Joe. And it is knowing all of the benefits and hurdles to starting and sustaining these projects, how would you recommend approaching institutions who might be interested in doing a project like this, associated data, but are hesitant to open up their collections?
I mean, I think that was kind of like not the hurt. I mean, Dumbarton Oaks is very open about their material, but the idea of like sharing it with something like Wikidata. And I think, again, like imparting to people that there is that authority, as long as the authority goes back to the owner, you know, with that, you know, those, I don't remember what they're called now. I mean, you know, like the properties that, like a unique property for, like, you know, a med ID, or, you know, something that will link back to a permalink to the owner's you know, explanation of the object, that it can kind of like maybe reassure people that regardless of what's happening in Wikidata, like there is that authority, that you're not changing the authority of the institution.
I think it's also worth making the point that, you know, if you don't do it, someone else still could. Like anybody can go out and create items for your collection objects, and they might not do it the way that you would do it. So why don't you go get there first?
Yeah, that person might be me. No, no. I mean, I think, yeah, I would say that I think it is important just to say, like, it is, yeah, it all loops back to the, you know, if there's a reference, it's just a way of bringing people back to what you want, or, you know, any public facing materials that you already have. But I think, I don't know, I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of just the other parts of my job is, you know, like teaching users how to use the CMS when they maybe haven't before. So like, I think a lot about like the ease of use of technology. And I think that, you know, I mean, it can be a little daunting as like, you know, when you hear like linked open data, like, oh, what is that? It can be a little bit like, I don't even know what this is. But I think like once you kind of sit down and just like, oh, this is not super difficult. I mean, it makes sense. So I think, yeah, just with any hesitant institutions, just encouraging them to like take a look and just kind of emphasizing the ease of use of Wikidata.
I think also the handbrake option, right, of reverts on edits, and you know, I also think well, so I think that's reassuring, right, that anything that is erroneous or disputed could be reverted. But I also have found it useful to talk to people about the history in an object's record of the edits that have been made. And, you know, thinking about it from an archival standpoint, and from this perspective of like the curatorial back and forth with a broader public about how to interpret an object, I think even if there's a dispute and something gets reverted, the idea that there's a record that there was a dispute about an interpretation of an object or something is a really important facet, right? Thinking about the the next generation and how we can more responsibly engage with multiple perspectives about the content that we're managing is, I don't know, something to experiment with and to celebrate, even where there may be reverts.
That's a great point, because like when you have a museum catalog, like a new researcher can come in and say, well, you have this catalog wrong. And so like the website might say that this is a Hellenistic weight and measure, but it's actually a Byzantine one. And, you know, that'll be changed in their database and reflected on the website. But then you, like what Anne said, you won't have that record that it was cataloged as a Hellenistic bronze weight and not a Byzantine one. And so like, when you start to see patterns with that, with some objects, you could see changes over time in like how things were interpreted, and, you know, not just mistakes, but stuff that like, it doesn't seem realistic that like the website would hold on to that data, like the original museum website would hold on to that.
I love these points. I could keep talking about this for days, but we're at time. So I wanted to thank all of you for participating. Stephanie, Bettina, Ian, and thanks so much for your time. For those of you watching live, thanks for attending. For those of you in the future watching the recording, thanks for watching. I really appreciate all your perspectives, and this has been such a stimulating conversation. There is one more coming up on Tuesday next week, 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern. It's going to be wonderful. I hope to see you all there. But one more virtual round of applause for all of our panelists. Thanks so much, guys, and see you soon.